Eek, 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 eek. It's Wednesday night, and we're glad to have David Cranmer Underdown back with us. Thanks for joining us again, David. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. I'm
Can you hear
always
me?
honored to be on. Thank you.
Okay, we
Can you
have
hear
a
me?
little bit of a bandwidth. I can hear you, but it was a little choppy. Let me see if Aaron is back there behind the board and can advise us whether have we got a good signal with David, Aaron? Let's
Oh,
I think we're good. I think we're
yeah.
doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, appreciate it. Let's go. Let's try it again. And thanks for joining us again, David Underdown. And what is the name of the town that you live in?
I live in Birmingham, Michigan, which is about 20 miles kind of northwest of Detroit.
You're the Detroit man among our Osprey team here, and I'm so fascinated. One day I'll get up to Detroit. I might have told you this before, but one of the historical characters that fascinates me is a man who was the captain of Fort Washington in 1814, and his name was Captain Dyson. And Captain Dyson has been shamed in history for blowing up the fort and leaving at the approach of the British fleet that came up the river. But I've always felt that he did the right thing. And, his troops lived to fight another day, and they actually did contribute later on, both in the Battle of Baltimore and in the amazing naval chase that we've talked about with George when the British Navy stole all the ships from Alexandria Harbor and were sailing them down the Potomac, while on the Maryland side, um, one of the admirals, one of the captains, Oliver Hazard Perry, was racing down the Maryland side to try to get to Indian Head, where they could put up a cannon and try to shoot these ships before they got away. And on the other side was who was it? I think it was. I always get it wrong. Free Trade and Sailors' Rights, Porter, Admiral Porter, who also chased down on the Virginia side and set up a battery and and actually did slow down those ships. But that all happened because of the politics of the day. The deep state of the day needed a scapegoat, and so they made Captain Dyson the scapegoat. Well, Captain Dyson has a great history up in Detroit before that, because he had been in the military, in the artillery corps, for like 20 years by that point. But when he was first in the military, he was stationed at Fort Detroit and was there when it was attacked by Tecumseh, and was there when the British were attacking it. And what happened there, of course, was the governor of Michigan, or the Michigan Territory, Governor William Hull, not Isaac Hull, the naval hero, but William Hull, the goat, that surrendered the fort. And so he surrendered the fort with Captain Dyson in charge of the artillery. So that creates a stain on Dyson, which was used to blame Dyson for blowing up Fort Washington, however many years later. It, it's just one of those historical things that I want to go see. I want to see where the batteries were. I want to see, because they were looking across at batteries from the Canadian side, where the British had cannons ready to blow up Fort Detroit at the same time Fort Detroit had cannons ready to blow up the British. So it was a kind of a standoff in which the civilian governor decided to save the lives of the people inside the fort, and surrendered. But I'm fascinated to see that area. I imagine it's all changed by now, but I don't know. Are you familiar at all with the surrender of Fort Detroit?
I've studied a little bit. My family does have kind of interesting ties to that. You're reading right now. My mom's side of the family were from Baltimore, and they went through the Cumberland Gap and then settled in Kentucky and then southern Indiana.
Hmm.
And then my dad's side of the family was his mom was from Steubenville, Ohio, which was, again, sort of the Wild West where they set up, the fort for the surveyors and, being, very close to Pittsburgh and, the whole Ohio River Valley that you've talked about. That was a big goal for Washington to move, into that farmland. Um, Fort Detroit is gone now. It's actually, it's kind of where, if you remember a while ago, Addie Ads and I, we did the video right after the election, and we actually parked right there. It's right by where Cobo Hall is, but all Fort Detroit is gone.
Yeah.
Um, they, I was going to say too, we had, characters like Mad Anthony Wayne. Detroit is Wayne County, and then Wayne State is the university right in Detroit that's named after Anthony Wayne. And then again, on my mom's side, they were, we talked about this a little bit. They lived in a place called Princeton and Patoka, Indiana, which is in Gibson County, southern Indiana, very close to New Harmony, which New Harmony was the Robert Owen colony. And what I've read is that it really was a communist style settlement where they did experimental farming and stuff like that. And then my dad's side of the family was from Trumansburg, New York, right next to Cornell and Ithaca. And they were my great grandfather and his brother were both agricultural school from Cornell, which as we know is they both died really young. My great grandpa died in 1930. He was hired by Alex Dow, who was the running the Detroit Edison Company, and he worked for a company called Huron Farms, which was an experimental farm. He moved there in I think 1902, and lived for almost 30 years in a place called Barton Hills, Michigan, which is right next to Ann Arbor, and that's where he subdivided the Barton Hills. It has interesting history also because it was he hired Frederick Law Olmsted's family to do the landscape architecture there. So he worked with Olmsted, and his brother was also Cornell agriculture, and he went to Long Island in 1904, and he worked for a man named Cary Sanger, who was the Undersecretary of War, and he worked on his farm, and then he was hired to go to Brazil, and he died in Sao Paulo of yellow fever in 1907. And Sanger's wife was a Cleveland Dodge, which is the mining family. So again, like my family doesn't know any of this stuff. I try to, kind of figure it out and piece it together. But what I think was happening was Olmsted was very involved in the Union League Club, which was doing sanitation and water to New York City. He's famous for doing the landscape architecture for Central Park in New York, the mall in DC, Bayou. He did Yellowstone Park. So, a lot of very famous projects for the Olmsteds. And again, like I think that the landscape architecture is a little bit of a throw, and that it's really they're doing irrigation, sanitation, water systems, and that's what I think that they may have been more involved in. But again, he died in 1930, very young. And then my grandfather, he had to go to he ingested a peanut in his lung and collapsed it when he was 14 years old when my great grandpa died, and he was sent to Sarnac, New York, to the Trudeau Sanitarium where he lived for 2 years in the iron lung. So that was
Oh,
yeah. And if you look at the history of that, that's where they had the hotel where like E.H. Harriman built the hotel there, and Rockefellers, and they had the first wire service to the stock exchange and stuff like that was from the hotel right next to it. So again, these are all characters that have been gone for a long time, but but it's interesting because that Ann Arbor, we were kind of talking in the pre-show about that. My grandpa and all his brothers went to the University of Michigan, and they have stories that, like, when he was a little boy, he would like ride his go-kart around the Michigan Stadium, like while it was under construction. He would like go around the oval, things like that. So I was always a big Michigan fan because he went there, and then of course my grandmother, whose story sadly is a little bit like your father's. She was somebody that she was a chemist at the University of Michigan, and she was working at the Children's Hospital and did a lot of apparently was doing work with blood transfusions and things like that of that nature in that era. Her brother, father, and grandfather were all University of Michigan doctors that were from Steubenville, Ohio. So she was somebody that passed away in 1966 of fast cancer. And, it was, my dad was a freshman in college when it happened. So he kind of, wasn't able to finish school. And, it was just, it was a really tough time for him. But the Ann Arbor history, it's like 40 miles from where I live. And, I'd always just grown up, going to the football games and loving that aspect of it. And I didn't really understand a lot of the sort of the deeper history of the University of Michigan, and we were talking before how its connection with the Ford family and the Ford Foundation, and then also just like General Motors was partnered with DuPont in that era and was the largest corporation in the world in Detroit. So there's a lot of interesting history, because it's if you go to Detroit now, it has pockets of places that have been redeveloped, but it's a lot of blight. It's a lot of it just doesn't strike you as a place that would have been the arsenal of democracy, where they had manufacturing abilities to make ordnance and war machines like no other place in the entire world, which we've gotten into George's, has talked about the auto bailout this week, and with Oleg Deripaska being a character that was a Russian that was involved in a lot of the battery technology, the autonomous vehicle technology, things like that were all brokered during the auto bailout. So that's that's something that I I'm trying to figure out too, because again, the people that were involved in the bailout were Steve Feinberg, who's he's DynCorp, he's Cerebus Capital. You had Tim Geithner, who is Warburg Pincus now. He was with the Bank of New York and Mellon Bank before that, and his dad was the Ford Foundation doing the microloans that taught Obama's mom how to do that in Indonesia. And then you had Steve Ratner, who was the money manager for Michael Bloomberg. And of course, with the COVID situation, Bloomberg is the key donator. His contributions to John Hopkins Public Health School is I think the largest donation to any university in the in the world. So I know that's kind of a lot of things to go through, but I'm trying to understand, the foundations, the universities, who the key people are, and then, sadly weave my own family into it, because they're everywhere in the story. And again, they're always the ones that, end up, dying young, or what, or having, tragedies or whatever. But it's, it's an interesting study, because there are, there's just a lot. There's just a lot there, and then of course, like with Paul Whelan, being the kind of the broker for Roger Crone at Borg Warner and Lados, making the news. I mean, that doesn't really stick out to I think most people, but to me it means a lot because he also worked for Kelly Services, and if people have followed the show, I went to high school with the founder of Kelly Services' grandson, who was somebody that died in 9/11. So there's a lot of
The grandson did, or
the
the
grand
grandfather?
no the grandfather's name was Russell Kelly, and that was his mother's father that founded Kelly Services, and he was made his he was a grocer from Louisville that then came up to Detroit and learned accounting in the grocery business for A&P, and then got into the temporary services business, which was based in Troy. We actually did the show with George and I, and then you and Professor Hamamoto in front of the Kelly Services headquarters, and that's in Troy, Michigan, right next to where I live. And the grandson was a year younger than me in school, and his name was Ted Adderley, and he went to Vanderbilt and was had graduated in 2001, and he I think lived in New York for 3 weeks, and went to work in September, and that was it. So it was it was just shocking. I mean, I lived in New York City at the time, and my sister did also. She worked at Hearst Magazine, which is another, lot of characters in the Hearst Magazine world also. But that's
Yeah.
Ted, and he was somebody that I was on the lacrosse team with him, and I wasn't really close with him, but I was close enough that I got invited to his graduation party the year. I was 1 year ahead of him, but his family lived in a really beautiful house in Bloomfield Hills, really close to Cranbrook School, which is another landmark that has a lot of intrigue, because that's where Mitt Romney was a student there. Danny Ellsberg from the who worked for Ted Shackley in the Phoenix program, or sorry, Lansdale in the Phoenix program, but he was also Pentagon Papers, Washington Post, Rand Corporation. Just a lot of and Lansdale's also is from Detroit as well. So there's just a lot of characters from Michigan. I mean, again, it doesn't seem like it could be, but Michigan does have a lot of connections to the stories of now.
Yeah, I was just thinking about all of the connections. That's I think what I love about having this community, this Osprey community, is that you have your vast knowledge about things that other people don't know anything about, but then we have other people that know things that you and I don't know anything about.
Right.
And but the cross fertilization, and like a little bit of that happened last night when I understand you were watching the show with me interviewing Bill Taylor, and he was talking about Monmouth, New Jersey, and that of course raises the issue of who is David Sarnoff, and maybe I'll take advantage of your expertise and ask you to just give us a little introduction. Pretend I've never heard of David Sarnoff, and tell us why he's important, and what you think we should bear in mind as we think about this man.
Well, I'll connect again both sides of my family on this, because I think they're both very relevant. So on my grandpa from Indiana, he grew up in Princeton, Indiana, and he went to Purdue University. He then was an electrical and mechanical engineer at Purdue, and then he worked for a company called Potter and Brumfield in Princeton, which was known as the relay kings of the world. And a relay is like a switch or a timer that's used in electronic devices. And so he worked there, and then he was recruited to work for RCA, and he was commuting to Bloomington, Indiana, which is about an hour from Princeton, and what he would do is he would stay in a dormitory basically. And again, with the scary connections, the building that he stayed in is the building where Subway was, that Jared from the, who lost all the weight, walking to eat Subways. That was the same building at Atwater and I forget the cross street, but he lived there. So he worked at RCA. He was, again, like, he's the person that when I first heard George, I was like connected with George immediately because his depth of knowledge was the same, like just incredible. Like he was so, he just knew so much about, electronics and things that I couldn't understand, but, like just a lot of things. But he worked at RCA. He worked in a small group with a man named Sarkis Tarzan, who was his boss, who ran, basically started that. And he, they were doing the proximity fuse, and that again, that was something that, I don't know how much my grandpa had to do with that. Again, he worked in a group with like 5 engineers. They said there were 2,000 workers at the Bloomington plant. There were only 20 people that were read into the what they called the vacuum cleaner project in Bloomington. It was called Madam X at the other. I think there were 5 locations in the U.S. that were doing the proximity fuse. But he was, recruited to go and work in New Jersey before my mom was born, and they decided not to. They kept him in Bloomington, and he, his basically, they did the color TVs in Bloomington, and as far as I always knew, he was like really into doing radio work and doing the color television, and he was like, his role was like he was the Six Sigma tester, like the failure detection testing, things like that. But that's Bloomington, and Bloomington, if you've ever been there, is like a very quintessential Midwestern city. It's very tied to the Indiana University. It's a beautiful limestone campus. But to get to RCA and to Sarnoff, again, that it just doesn't seem possible because, I think of them as being these very, just modest, Midwestern grandparents that, didn't seem like RCA was, originally was General Electric. And when Marconi patents were basically acquired by GE, they created RCA to become their radio, and they had a man named David Sarnoff who was basically became the head of RCA, and they created like NBC, in the television. They started off with the radio, and again, I don't know like a lot of the history of all the radio stuff, but they had, of course, the 30 Rockefeller Center was the RCA building, and as that's the location that became the British BSC, which was the British Security Co-op, I believe, or committee. And that's where the OSS and the CIA was sort of started, where Donovan was with Stevenson, and you had Alan Dulles had a floor also in the 30 Rockefeller Center. So Sarnoff was known as the general. He had and the reason I asked with Bill Taylor was because Princeton is the Alan Dulles was very affiliated with Princeton, and of course not Hoover, but Wilson was was the president of Princeton. And so they had it was originally called the RCA Laboratory Number 1 was in Princeton. It was later called Sarnoff Lab, but it to my understanding, it was where they were doing a lot of the military applications for radio technology and different television, radio. The liquid crystal monitors were very important. And again, with like they were working on radar, proximity fuse, and the Manhattan Project were basically the big 3 projects that were the big war projects they were working on. And this Princeton lab was that became the Sarnoff lab. And then a lot of the assets of it, and I checked it because I thought, because I said it in the chat yesterday and I couldn't remember exactly, but it did they did send a lot of the people and the IP out to California to create the Stanford Research Institute, which again was doing a lot of these kind of DARPA projects, and it sort of became the like like SRI partnered with a lot of the air the aerospace companies and the rocketry. Just different aspects were basically done through the universities and through these labs. And the other side of the coin for the Michigan angle was Charles Kettering is a name that I don't think a lot of people think of. He started Delco, which is the Dayton. It was basically they did like the automatic starter for the car. They did the Freon and air conditioning. They had they rented part of the Vigo lab, which is in Terre Haute, which again, people don't remember this, but that was where they were making anthrax munitions for Churchill in World War II in Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana. That was owned. So that was one of the labs like Fort Detrick, and when we talk about Plum Island, and these different chemical and biological weapon history. Sadly, Terre Haute, Indiana, is right in there with these other places. With Eli Lilly and then Degussa, we talked about. All had a stake in these Terre Haute and Lafayette, Indiana labs. But Kettering he ran General Motors, basically their high tech division. A lot of the military applications. He was the man that was tinkering with the fuels. He was a founder of ethyl, the tetraethylene, which the story is told about the Luftwaffe needing the no-knock, ethyl. That was Kettering that founded that with I'm blanking on the name. Walter Teagle from Exxon. Teagle.
Let's stop and take a moment about that, because to me, this is one of the most shocking things that I've learned in my reading, and I learned it in the book Trading with the Enemy by I think it's Charles Higham, Higham, and there it is. It was published 30 years ago, and you can just see that Walter Teagle was trading with the enemy. And not only that, that Roosevelt knew it, but he couldn't do anything about it because they had the oil. And Roosevelt didn't have the oil. Teagle had the oil. So it was a question of if you want to sail your ships, man, you're going to do what General Motors wants. And then they were selling stuff, through some cover stories and rigmarole, but they sold stuff to the Nazis in the war. And people need to know this. It's shocking. It's horrible.
Yeah. Well, Teagle goes back to Bronnable, which is the noble Baku oil. Going back to World War I for the Bolshevik. Yeah. So he was originally Humble Oil, and then he got into Exxon, which was Standard Oil of New Jersey, became Exxon later. But he was doing the negotiations with the Noble family, and that whole scenario is really laid out in the New Order books that I've been listening to kind of over and over again, because they just have a lot of details. It's the Eustace Mullen books, and I know he's kind of a controversial figure, but his background on the banking relationships and the business relationships is really strong. And I've been listening to it to try to get it locked in, because I think it really is important. Um, to
Can
add
you give me where you're listening to it? I'm not familiar with how to
it,
just
I just go
find
on
that.
YouTube, and it's just basically a book on tape. I just Google Eustace Mullen, the World Order.
Right.
Also has a book on the history of the Federal Reserve System, which is fascinating because again, a lot of people want to, point the finger at the Fed and say, hey, the Fed's, the problem. But, I feel like most people don't know what, again, the game is like who to really blame. And, you can say the Federal Reserve Bank, but there are stakeholders in the Federal Reserve, and that was his initial mission, was to figure out which private banks were the shareholders in the Federal Reserve System. And he breaks it out, who they are, because again, it was a way that, there's like, when I again, like when I'm studying like the older history, like I love that you've been doing, with the, like, even the Venetian traders, like they always had secret stakeholders, in these trade companies. So they'd have like a public face, that would sort of be the Christopher Columbus, or the kind of the front man that they would make the hero out of. But there would be silent investors, and it's usually the same banks that'll stake them, but they don't always want to be known. And that was kind of like what he wanted to figure out, was who are the stakeholders. And again, it's a, to me, a very important thing to learn, because it makes the characters of now stand out so much more. If the name, you know like when I see Pincus Warburg, right, that was Anthony Blinken, who's our current Secretary of State. His father was a partner at Warburg Pincus.
Hmm.
So if you know that Paul Warburg, wrote the Federal Reserve, or wrote basically the Federal Reserve Act, and that his brother Max Warburg wrote it for the Germans and for the French, and for the other brother wrote it for the English. And Max Warburg was also supposed to be the head of German intelligence as well, before Reinhard Gehlen.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then when you
Wow.
get into the again, like later, one of Donovan's key assistants when he was setting up the OSS was a Warburg. So this family is not just banking; it also is the intelligence network, which they've run. Was through the newspapers, and then it became, like we talked about, RCA, which had NBC, and then CBS, and then we get to now with talking about like CNN, or these companies. And you don't think, well, they're a news service, they're not going to be the network. But then you look at Ted Turner. He founded the Nuclear Threat Initiative with Sam Nunn, who wrote the Lugar-Nunn Act, which was the basically the end of the Soviet Union, when they decided to disarm them and use their warheads for peaceful nuclear purposes. With him and with Henry Kissinger, and I forget the fourth founder of it, but the nuclear fuel bank that we talk about in Kazakhstan, that was Nuclear Threat Initiative, that was found, that's Warren Buffett that is sort of running that. So again, like, if you can know that the Warburgs are like a really important name, I find it very helpful to kind of put together who the key characters are now, because there's a lot of misdirections, and a lot of names that you can get lost trying to sort through everything. And if you can't pick out the key ones, and you spin your wheels.
Yeah, it sounds so much like what I've been reading in Rulers of Evil, about how the idea is to put learning versus learning out into the world. And so you'd have a smart person on this side of something, a smart person on the other side of something, and let them become the two polar opposites. People would gravitate to one or the other if they have an interest in the issue. But the whole point is not to decide which one's right and which one's wrong. The whole point is to keep people confused and fighting among each other. And that type of manipulation of populations is something that Americans are just not ready for. We're naive. We don't know these tactics that have been played on people for millennia, because these are old imperial tactics, divide and conquer in so many different ways. And so we see now these characters that you, and that was great. I mean, your exposition of those Warburgs, wasn't one of them also an expert on cancer?
I don't know about that, but we can get back to Charles Kettering because he was, Sloan Kettering was General Motors Hospital before, and that was founded. Again, very interesting history because U.S. Grant was somebody that everybody knows was the president, was the great general, and then became the president, and then he died of mouth cancer, and he was one of the first, kind of famous people to die of mouth cancer, and he was famous, for smoking cigars from dusk till dawn. But when he died broke. His son had gotten into a partnership that went bust in I forget, maybe the 1888. One of the banking panics, his son went bust, and he basically lost all of his assets. He had collected a lot of not souvenirs, but like he had like toured the world and been given all of these sort of artifacts. And so he was like living kind of like right off of Central Park with all these artifacts. He died. And then the Astors basically financed the cancer hospital in New York City. And it was called Cancer Hospital for a while. And then of course, John D. Rockefeller Jr. donated the land to make it, it became then the General Motors Hospital, and they had a guy that was named Douglas originally, which is a name that I connect with because that's my great grandmother that was from Trumansburg, New York, was a Douglas, and also died horrible death, burned to death. After her husband died in 1930 in a car crash. But she was a Douglas from, upstate New York, Finger Lakes. And again, I don't know if they're connected, but there was this Douglas that basically founded the cancer treatment using radium. And they were doing, crazy stuff like using mustard gas to try to cure cancer. Then it later gets into the Cornelius Rhodes and, Mark Kulak does a lot of work on like Alice Moore. A lot of really dark history at Sloan Kettering Memorial. Alfred Sloan was kind of the celebrity CEO that they brought in to run General Motors. They had, Henry Ford was, very famous as a, leader of industry in Detroit. And Alfred Sloan was the lifelong friend of Pierre DuPont. So General Motors and DuPont were connected. And then they also worked with Jacob Raskob, who was the accounting wizard of, that apparently, put together the deal of GM and DuPont. But he, of course, had the Russian retreat house, which was right by you, Piney Point. That was Jacob Raskob's house.
Yeah,
And
not Piney Point, but you're right. Yeah, it is not that far away.
whichever one the Russian retreat house was in Maryland in the Chesapeake Bay that was shut down, where
Yeah.
was going with Konstantin Kilimnik or whatever, ferrying people back and forth. That was the Raskob, and of course he was the treasurer of the Knights of Malta, and he was the builder of the Empire State Building, or at least put together the consortium.
Wait a minute. You saying he was the treasurer of the Knights of Malta? I never knew that.
Yeah, scroll down. You'll see it on the Wikipedia. Yeah, he was the treasurer for them. So again, like, these Detroit, and Alfred Sloan was the one that came up with planned obsolescence as a business strategy. That was one of his great contributions, was to have your fender fall off after 8 years and require constant service. These are, again, it's hard for me because my, grandfather was the, do it right the first time. And, that was his whole mantra. So it's very hard to get into that. But yeah, Raskob is somebody that is very interesting because, the Empire State Building also had the, right before they dropped the atomic bombs, it had the, I think it was a B-25 that crashed into and I think it was Catholic Services that it crashed into in the Empire State Building.
I don't know where it crashed into. That maybe Aaron would get up a Wikipedia on that incident, the airplane crash into the
But
Empire State Building in the early 40s, I think.
it was right. It was literally like a week before they dropped the atomic bomb, and I always thought, well, maybe what they were doing was trying to like, um, get people thinking of like the King Kong story, with the Japanese, with King Kong and Godzilla as sort of a pre-attack to get people, and again, it was supposed to be, it was an American serviceman, and I forget, it was it left from the base in Massachusetts where Peter Strzok was supposed to be doing a lot of his, activities in Massachusetts. I forget the name of the Air Force or the base there. But I believe it's the same base that MIT was doing, quite a bit of their. It wasn't Rad Lab; it was Lincoln Lab that did a lot of the radar and things were being done in that same airfield in Massachusetts. But that crash was something that always, I didn't know about it. I was shocked I'd never heard of it before because, of course, like the 9/11 being one of the historically most well-known events in American history. The Empire State Building is such a iconic building, and I don't know. I was just shocked that I had never heard that a plane crashed into it.
It would certainly be interesting to dig further into that incident. And yeah, that photograph that they showed us there, that had, it looks like just a steam vent in front of it, but it also contributes to this idea of everything's on fire. It looks like an attack of some kind. You even see some flames up in the upper stories there, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe it happened on a Saturday, but the kind of the key thing that it did was it changed the tort law. They passed a tort law where you could sue, I believe, the government. If you go back, Aaron, to the crash, that was, a big, change in the the law was that, and there it is, the Federal Tort Claim Act was passed, the long pending.
Wow. Wow. So my conspiratorial lawyer mind, who has studied the Federal Tort Claims Act since 1976, I guess, when I started law school, um, had never known that this was a response to that airplane crashing into, because it was an Army airplane, and therefore the government should be responsible. But it's not fair. It's just not fair. We should be able to sue the government. Well, of course, that means we're suing the taxpayers, right? We're suing ourselves. One of the reasons that we don't uh, do that is because, geez, we are just suing ourselves. But we do have the Federal Tort Claims Act, and lawyers have been very, very active in enforcing the Federal Tort Claims Act. I promise you, if you want to study, how lawyers uh, do things in federal court, there it is. So without the Federal Tort Claims Act, a lot of legal cases wouldn't have happened. So, gosh, I wonder. You just wonder, did somebody pay somebody to fly that plane?
Yeah, it's a it's crazy. Again, it was something that I was just shocked that I'd never heard that before. Because again,
Yeah.
like, you just think of, most people think of the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building as sort of being like the two main icons of New York or whatever. Times Square. I mean, there's a lot, but it's one of the main ones.
I think that it's excuse me for maybe tossing out my idea here. I know everybody wants to hear David's ideas and not so much mine, but my well, I want you to reflect on what I'm thinking here. I think that it really is about the actuaries and insurance companies at bottom, because what we have right now is a financial system that is just stretched to its absolute limit. And they're going to keep on stretching it. It's like how big can we blow the balloon up before something bad happens? And they're going to keep on pushing it and pushing it, and they may never ever blow up in my lifetime. I don't know. I have no way of knowing. I don't think they want it to blow up, but at the same time, it's like, a bunch of people, everybody's got their own angle, everybody's got their own edge, and everybody's trying to keep on the value of what they have, whether it's in dollars or gold, they don't care. They just don't want to lose the value of all the stuff that they've, or gotten either legally or illegally. They've got it, and they don't want to let go of it. Insurance companies, you talk about hidden investors, people that would really be running, the economy by investing in the ship, and then you put somebody famous, Francis Drake, let's say, in charge of it, and you send him out, but he's going out there to make money for you, to take down the Spanish treasure galleons and make money for you, but he is your man, and that hidden hand behind that's got all the real capital is associated with other people that are sending out other captains, and they're all going to sit in the coffee house one day and say we should pool our risk together, and they pool all the risk together, and then if one of them loses, they pay him out a little something, and everybody survives, and it becomes this cartel in which they all protect each other, and there's this gradually growing amount of money that it represents the premiums and things that have gotten in there. And as I look at Hartford Fire Insurance Company, and also really look hard at the Travelers, because the Travelers is the one with that Knights of Malta umbrellas, thing. I mean, it's and the night they actually had a little keychain thing with a knight, in armor as one of their little trinkets that they'd give out. The Travelers is, to me, one of these organizations that's been put together in a very Freemasonic way. And I think that if you look into the Hartford, you'd find a similar thing going back a little bit earlier in time, but they both are so powerful. Look at all and then it goes into Swiss Re and all of that, the reinsurance, this stuff. To me, reinsurance is a way of understanding where all the risk is really allocated in a place like the upper reaches of one of these insurance companies, Allianz maybe, or something. But I just want to bounce that off you, that the reason that all these horrible things are happening right now is because the amount of money that's out there, the amount of value out there that people owe to one another, with interest rates over the years. You talk about Eustace Mullins, you talk about interest rates and Ezra Pound, and the idea that all of this is fake. It's fake money. You're not creating anything when you pay interest to somebody. All this has to be resolved somehow. And what I think the whole idea of our being overpopulated, as Prince Philip, God rest his soul, uh, was famously saying that he wanted to come back as a virus to get rid of so many of these useless eaters. So is that what it is? Is that the insurance companies of the world have reached their limit, and they say no more, no more. We can't bring in any more people. We've got to get rid of. We've got to start downsizing the whole risk pool, and that means, yeah, get rid of some folks. That's a lot to chew. I'm sorry for that, but I need to put this stuff out in the universe,
I mean, sadly, that's stuff that I have thought about, since I started studying finance. And, I've always been interested. One of the, smartest, I worked at Munder Capital for a year, which is a money manager that was in Birmingham. And my boss, who was really a smart guy that I really liked, he taught me a lot about, kind of strategies. He did it through sports gambling and, and because it's all this, it's really all the same. Whether it's running a Travelers or an AIG or Swiss Re. Um, the reason that those businesses are so attractive is because you collect premiums and you are collecting income, and then you are gathering a steady flow of money that's a small kind of unnoticeable amount that most people don't really think about, but you build up a large asset base. But basically when you're running a book, um, the best way to do it is you want to balance it 50-50. It's literally, it's like the same thing that they do with the messaging, the Hegelian dialect, the what do they call it, the synthesis, or thesis, antithesis, synthesis is the Hegelian dialect. It's sort of the same. You want to balance the scale. I mean, Kissinger talks about it as his teeter-totter strategy of tension, but you want to have it where you have you balance your risk on both sides evenly, and then you collect what's called the vigorish. You collect the fees, the exchange rate, and again, it's a small amount that it's unnoticeable. Warren Buffett uses the metaphor of the perfect business being a toll booth, where you just, everybody just, throws in $1 when they cross over the bridge, and you collect a lot of money, but you can also throw the whammy on people where you can, police that and not let people cross. And so there's an additional power behind with that as well. I always, I've been just like deeply frustrated my whole life with trying to understand the financial system. I mean, I want things to be simple and understandable, and they've just made it like as complicated as possible. Sadly, I do think that there is maybe some validity to not paying pensions or health insurance to people, and cutting that off. Um, that I could see that. It's less people that you can tax. The more people that you can tax and collect from, I mean, there's a benefit to that as well. I mean, people will argue that if you get rid of everybody, then not there's not as many people to collect from. But what I was going to say too with the with uh with the with the stock market, and with the insurance companies, that I do think that the insurance is a key thing to look at and to understand, because it does circle back to the key players. I mean, like a Hank Greenberg is AIG, Marsh McClellan, Warren Buffett. I always, people think of him as Berkshire Hathaway, which used to be an old textile manufacturer in Connecticut or Massachusetts, I can't remember, but I always thought of him as General Re and Geico, the insurance companies. That was his business. That, to me, that's what I always thought his business was. And I was as I always say, Warren Buffett is like my least favorite character, because I feel like he sells himself with all the slogans and all of the, hey, I'm just, a folksy, Midwest guy that, eats McDonald's and lives in drives a used car and blah, blah. Like, but he's a shark in real life. And he, I don't know. I was always bothered by that. Like, I don't like that level of misdirection. So he's always been somebody that's really bothered me. Mainly because my grandfather basically gave the same strategies, but he really lived that. He was somebody that, saved for a rainy day, and, tried to be wise with his money, and, invest in education and his family and things like that. So I have a big bone with Warren Buffett, and it's hard for me, because then you get people that want to, boost Patrick Byrne, and, oh, Patrick Byrne is a, he's a hero that's going to come in and, save the election or whatever. And, to me, his dad, was a number two for Buffett. He ran Geico. He ran Overstock or whatever. Again, so like these characters, I have very strong feelings about different people. I don't like to, um, ruin heroes for people, but again, like with, with where we are, I also think that, and this is what I wanted to circle back to that I couldn't think of before. Fletcher Prouty talked about in, I believe it was in like 1880, all of the kind of bankers, people that kind of ran the East India Company and the Dutch West India Company. They I think they had a new mapping technique or something where they were able to determine that the globe was round. And basically,
Yeah.
when they determined that, they said, now we can basically survey everything, and we want to do surveys. So when you talk about like insurance being the key driver and accountants, I think that's a lot to that, because I really think that agricultural survey, geological survey, the oceanic surveys, that is where the big players are. They want to know where the resources are, and they want to invest in logistics systems to move them and get them to market. Um, and basically, I mean, the way I think of it is simply is like they want to have gas stations where they can fill their boats. Like if you're going to go around the globe or do global trade, you need filling stations where you can go. You can't run out of gas on the trip. So that's, why they want to have, these loop, petroleum systems that are like out in the, we talk about like Zapata Oil doing the offshore rigging, but and being able to drill for resources like through the water as opposed through the land. I think of, we talk, I know Bissell is a big, bad character in our story, but, people talk about Area 51 and the UFOs and all that stuff. But, Area 51 was where Bissell was running the U2 program, right? So to me, that was a geological survey project. They had the Polaroid camera that was able to take these pictures, and of course they were talking about it more for like a military survey to say, hey, this is where the ordnance or the munitions are, or the armies are in these places. But again, I circle back to that Prouty, what he said, where they wanted to know where this is where the resources are. I think they were doing aerial photography for the survey projects, and that's really where the big, you talk about like the big hidden hand money. That's what I mean. They want to have the trade routes, whether they're by sea or by land or by air, but they want to know where stuff is, and they want to be able to go in and take it by whether they can negotiate, kindly, or go in and poison everybody and clear them out.
Yeah.
That's for that's for the military people or whatever to figure out. But, for them, they want to know where stuff is and be able to inventory and track it, like you said, and, have,
Yeah.
accounting systems. And, with the lockdown and, the Internet of Things, and, the talk of, like, oh, like we want to do all this health surveillance and, monitor everybody's bank accounts. Like, I think that they have done that forever. They've been able to see that. I mean, the idea that there was a Fourth Amendment, where all that was private, like, I don't know. I mean, it seems like, they want you to believe that, but I just don't necessarily know if that's the case.
David, don't you know that gentlemen do not read gentlemen's mail?
Well,
Don't you know that? I mean, we no, that never happened. Just the fact that the um, postal services of the various empires throughout history have been used for intelligence by the empires. That doesn't mean that it still happens. And of course, our postal service would never ever. I mean, tampering with the mail. My God, who would do that? No, I mean, you're right. It's been a ridiculous, honored in the breach at best, for at least 100 years now. Um, but that's part of the weakness of our system and our people and our politicians, just to let that happen. Because I can see in times of war, and I can even see in terms of foreign diplomacy when you're dealing with potential adversaries. But in terms of just domestic mail, that should not be something that people are afraid is going to get read by somebody. It diminishes the quality of your life to be able to just write what you want to and send it to your friends. That losing that, you're right. That was, the camel's nose under the tent, or the slide over the slippery slope to losing that whole expectation of privacy, which we just barely have anyway. According to the Supreme Court, we had Justice Douglas. Speaking of the name Douglas, was the champion of the right of privacy, but he's gone now, of course. Oh gosh, I'd like to go on another hour with you. Could you go could you go another 10 minutes? Let's go to 9:15.
One thing I was going to say is the tying back to that, the Baku and the Noble and the Rothschilds and the Exxon, they created the first cryptology machine after the Bolshevik Revolution, and that became it became the crypto AG, which was the forerunner of the Enigma machine.
Okay.
And it was, if you look up crypto AG, that was it was a joint venture with the BND and the CIA, and of course I assume the SIS as well, the Brits. But those were the machines that I believe probably Kissinger was selling. And if when you get into the I was reading an article 2 days ago about the history of crypto AG, and that was sort of the secret sauce that Kissinger had, that he was able to read everybody's messages going, all of the negotiations during the oil crisis and the kind of the collapse of Bretton Woods. They were selling these backdoored crypto machines to the Iranians and to the Egyptians, and they were able to basically see everything. And I know that Kissinger always says, "Oh, I had the Rolodex of every important person. I could call them and kind of understand the what was going on." But that, I think, is the you know ties into the Dmitry Alperoviches of now. It was this crypto AG, which again was a joint venture between Exxon, which was Standard Oil, so you have your Rockefeller angle. It was Noble, which is they're the Nobel, everyone thinks of the Peace Prize, but they were the TNT. They were one of the four horsemen of war metal, is Noble, the Swedes. And then you had the Rothschilds, who are always into the logistic networks and the signal comms, being their sort of their strategic advantage, as well as have. And again, that stuff, I do think, like with your reading that you're doing now, you talk about the Masons. I always think of the Knights Templar, because they were supposed to be the original, made the check system was through the Templars, and they were very into encryption and cryptography. So I always think, well, if you historically were the had these roads that you'd cleared, these basically trade routes, and with the different temples or banks along the way, where you could put your treasure, your gold, or whatever had of value, and you didn't want to ride with it so you wouldn't get robbed. And instead you could get a piece of paper with encryption on it. That becomes the banking system of now. So we talk about all the Venetian traders, and Eustace Mullins says he can tie it back to 2,000 years, and I think you probably can, because that's if you're into the running exchanges, like you talk about the stock market. Like, I think a big goal when they did the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 was they wanted to create world prices for commodities, and that was a big deal, was to have currencies and exchange rates, but different commodities where you could influence the supply, the demand, but also the price of it. we see it now with, the ports sort of being backed up and, with the inflation now. But, if you go back through time, they would block the Suez Canal, and that would, create a price shock for oil, or, different things. So having the ability to have a world price for a commodity, because that's when I think of the coffee houses, that's really what it was, you had privilege for cotton, and this person had it for tobacco, and the other person had it for, spices, or, cochineal, which is the dye, like, and you would exchange these things. And in China, it was the Hong system. The Hongs were like basically the booths or the coffee houses in China. But it was a place of exchange. You have to, like I always try to think of what the systems were, and they had what was, they had the pawn brokering system before. They had paper, to make currency or to make checks, or just straight barter. And you'd go to these houses of exchange where you could then, because if you were doing straight barter, like if you were trading eggs for flour, you would have to find the person for flour that had the flour, and you may not. But if you go to a house of exchange, then they would have everything there. And that was sort of why they would make, again, like the Dulles kind of focal point system. Like you would create centers that you could really, again, control the supply, the demand, the security of kind of these strategic points, which were ports or cities on a, rail system or airports. But that's how I try to like break things down in kind of like their simpler terms of like, what are they doing? Like a lot of these bank collapses in history, somebody posted a thing to me this week, like, are we going to have the biggest collapse ever? And I think, well, we could, but I like to look at, what was why did the Mississippi bubble happen? What was the South Sea bubble? What were the Dutch tulips? Like, what were the historical collapses that we had? And from what I understand, it was basically to smash the exchange and take it over and collapse the economy, and then come in and, okay, so you have, sugar and rum and molasses is the sugar exchange in Santo Domingo and Hispaniola, or Dominican, Haiti. That was supposed to be the crown jewel of the Western colonies, was the sugar from Haiti. And Hispaniola was the center of the French trade, which then moves up to New Orleans after the Louisiana Purchase. But after the Civil War, the cotton exchange moves from New Orleans. They move it to New York. So again, like if you follow where the exchanges were, and you also have to look at kind of the history of even being able to print money, having paper and ink, and being able to, you were talking about the printing press with, being a kind of a super cycle change in history with communications and who can control the information. But the same thing applies for the monetary systems as well, because you need to have a system for, either making coins or bullion, minting it, gathering it, refining it. We talked about how mercury was such a key resource, because that was how you would, reduce silver or gold to make coins. But you also had to have technology to stamp it or engrave it. And, so all of those things were, part of the history that, played into the different bubbles. I mean, everything is electronic now. So, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because again, like I said last time, like I graduated from college. I wanted to be a financial analyst, and I graduated in 2000. And that was right when basically the message was scrap all of your, all of the financial statement analysis. Like that's just all old fashioned. Everything now is, these are new technology companies that you can't do traditional analysis on. You just have to predict, be able to predict their future earnings based on, things that can't be measured. And that really bothered me, because again, like it, you can create a narrative, like if you're a good influential speaker or writer, or you can really influence that stuff. And I'd like to have more of a, be able to count stuff and account for it. So that was, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because again, the amount of money that is going into our system is just, it's crazy. They talk about you know, these, uh, these budgets and, getting the 3.5 trillion or 5 trillion, and, but there's stimulus, every week, that goes into the market to keep the stock market. The companies are using the money that that they're lent from the Federal Reserve to buy their own stock. So again, it's like, you know, sadly, I always think, because again, if you study the Federal Reserve System, like, yes, you just hit the button and you transfer the federal funds to a, Chase Manhattan Bank, and now they can make a loan. But what is the second they send that money, which was created with no asset to back it, they charge interest on that, and that interest is real. And if you don't pay that, then they can take title to the asset that, So again, it's a way that they can bust you, but they can trade you their dollars for your hard assets. And that's what, that's the thing that I worry about is, but again, you trace it back, they've had full domination of this system for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it literally is the same families and banks and insurance companies that are really, they're smart. They've thought, like you're studying the Jesuits, and, the Rothschilds are another group that, you can study their systems, and they are very, they know their Machiavelli, they know their Sun Tzu. They are, for me, it's hard because I feel like they prey on the trusting good nature of people that just want to have a simple life and not think about, these things, and just sort of like focus on their family or whatever, and not think of these, kind of technical, what they're getting into, or, they'll use a lot of PR to make, shame people if they don't, you don't own a house, then you're not living the American dream, or, and really play that up where, that necessarily isn't the best situation for everybody. But, I think it affects a lot of people really, I mean, I feel like social credibility is is the main thing that people, focus on. They want to be respected by their family and friends and their community. And, a lot of these things, are part of that. So it makes it hard, because for me, like, I am, I try to think of ways to give good, what I think is good advice. But again, like, I've been proven wrong on this stuff like my entire life. If you look at the stock market, I mean, it's at all-time highs, where my analysis would be that it's, that there's incredible risk in investment right now.
It's we're 15 minutes over, and I'm still wanting to keep going. If you don't mind, I'd
Yeah.
like to go another couple minutes. I have two big thoughts, and the first one I just want to lay out there, and that's this: you blew my mind when you said that the U2 program, it, it, it's like they say it's a military program, but what it really is free surveying tool for all the potential investors out there. And so, so I mean, all of a sudden I had this realization that they're using these great cameras that we've got, and this incredible military technology. But why wouldn't they just use it to, find the good stuff, find the resources, and yeah, that's probably exactly what they've been doing. It fits in with the whole nonsense to me of the Cold War. It's a terrible thing to say nonsense about a Cold War, but gosh, it really does start to look like a school play, to use a George Webb term. I and if that's what it is, then the whole Gary Powers and thing and everything else, it's all just for the newspapers, for the people for the little folks to have a narrative that we can, oh, look, they shot down this, oh no, what do we do? Missiles in Turkey, missiles in Cuba. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Oh, I can't think about it. I got to go to work. Oh, let's get to work and just think about something, boring, but that gets my paycheck. So that's the one thought that I just wanted to toss out there, and thank you for that because gosh, that makes so much sense. And then the other thing is when I've been studying Fabianism and the fact that the Fabian Society is the founder of the London School of Economics.
Yep.
And within the London School of Economics, they basically, I don't know this stuff. This is just my surmise from a little bit of skimming reading, but there's two basic schools that they developed: the Keynesians, and the Austrians, or this guy named Hayek. And these are two different approaches to running an economy. And we are under the Keynesian system now, which is where the banks just keep on, whatever we got to do, we're going to keep this economy going. We're going to keep the game going. You need some more cash, we'll throw some more cash in. Let's just keep the game going. And don't worry about borrowing. It's not that big a deal, and it's just numbers on paper, and the government, blah blah blah. And that's the Keynesian idea. And the way that what that ends up doing is ending up in a place just like the Roman Empire, just like to Germany, just like we're headed towards, where there's got to be a bust. It's the bubble is going to bust at some point, and they know that. Of course, they know that. But the people in power have chosen between the two schools available to them, the Keynesian and the Austrian, and they said, "Oh, let's do the Keynesian," because that's easier, and it is, and it makes us all feel like we're rich and we're all happy and everything. If we didn't have a negative $20 trillion balance sheet as a nation, this would all be great. But that looms over us. It looms over all of us. And if the dollar continues to slide, it could go over the cliff. And that is the end of the Keynesian system. It's just gonna have to end somehow like that. Now, the Austrian system is much simpler. You just don't give the poor people anything at all. You just let them starve. And that's what they did to Ireland, right? You just say fuck them. Those people, they don't have anything, they don't deserve anything. The world has got too many of them, and just so fuck them, let them go. And that's the Austrian system. My simplified version. But the bottom line is this: neither one of those systems represents the universe of all economic systems. Those are just two different ways that those Fabians have figured out to screw the rest of us. And if you wanted to go at the Keynesian way, then you get people, Hillary Clinton and all of that. But here's what I think I wanted to say to you is that I've been thinking about what you said 2 weeks ago about how devastated you were when you realized that they're not going to use traditional value to value stock anymore, that they're going to use this magical thing of trying to figure out future value based upon a bunch of representations by people that have degrees in things like computer science and stuff. Well, that reminds me of the whole story of Bill Gates getting started and Microsoft and everything like that. All that stuff didn't need to be patented. All this stuff could be free, but because they were able to take advantage of legal and political inside track, they were able to they were, oops, I lost it. They were able to create value out of nothing. You know, the idea of Windows, what does that mean? It means you just put a little another thing there, but all of a sudden God has got all this value. And eh, eh, this idea is pure Keynesianism to make people think that things have value that don't have any value.
Yeah.
And now they've got us. So what I'm saying is that we should not be caught up in this false choice between Keynesianism and the devastating, just screw 'em school of Hayek. And we should realize that both of those are simply devices to keep the rich rich and the poor poor. And one way or the other, we're going to get screwed if we stick with that London School of Economics, which basically is right now today enforcing the will of those creepy Fabians that sat around in the 1890s and laid all these plans to control us through these devilish fiscal policies.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to add to that is with the Fabians, they were a political party, and they represented Britain at the Treaty of Versailles. Again, went right after after the original Federal Reserve System was created. In my analysis is World War I, they wanted to get rid of colonialism, and they wanted to get rid of monarchies, except for the British Crown. And they created new banking systems. The Fabians are they're the Labor Party now in England. So they didn't go away. They just rebranded. When you talk about the London School of Economics with the Fabian, the what's it called? Their stained glass that they presented. The presenter of it was Tony Blair, who's the Labor Party leader. Who again, when you get into all the Clinton Global Initiative kind of again rebranding of the World Wildlife Fund and the Safari Club, and now it's they just rebrand sort of the same things. But that's really what Saucy, or I mean not Saucy, but that was what Eustace Mullins really argues, is that these big wars or coups were based on when countries didn't want to bend to the fractional reserve kind of Federal Reserve banking system. um Again, like I get into kind of arguments with my dad over this stuff, but I really think that we do have had a fascist system in the United States, that went crazy under FDR. Because again, like people always think of fascism, they think of Mussolini and they think of terror squads, but I think of it as a purely economic system. And to me, it's when the government is partnering with private industry and basically giving federal contracts. And I believe that is a big part of our economy. Is we don't talk about the dark economy, like we've talked about the perm index and the paperclip, and kind of bringing these IG Farben assets and spreading them to different companies in all over the world, but a lot of them in the US. We talked about the Stanford Research Institute. You talked about Microsoft and Gates. I think a lot of what Rand Corporation was doing was creating these cover stories, basically these kind of whiz kid, the same as we started off talking about the Ford Foundation and Detroit, but the idea of having these superstar, either young people that have these ideas that the older traditional people can't understand the new ways. That's a lot of PR, and it's a lot of disrespect to a lot of really smart engineers and scientists and people that work privately and create a lot of these systems that get no credit, and it goes to a Bill Gates is a kid that comes up with the computer system or the language. Again, like I'm always sensitive to this stuff because my grandpa was somebody that he worked in the RCA lab, and when he retired, they said he had the most patents of any person in the history of RCA. And they all went to the company, and he didn't have a lot of respect for David Sarnoff. He thought he screwed the workers, but he wasn't somebody that, I mean, he had enough, and, was a very happy person, and, did a lot with our family. But, there's a lot, but again, like, I think a lot of the stuff he worked on was, weapons of destruction, like if you look at, the Crane Surface Warfare Center in Indiana, they were doing a lot of the electronic, you know, radar and microwave. We talk about all these different weapons, but that a lot of that stuff was done through the Navy, and he was right there in Bloomington. So, it's hard for me because, again, like, I don't know the backstories on all this stuff, but I do get offended by these kind of like bullshit, stories of, a Jeff Bezos or a Musk, or, I mean, to me, these guys are just they're just the face of the East India Company, or the Dutch West India Company. And they've got, the best and the brightest people in, Hollywood, or where New York, or wherever, the Tavistock, creating the very polished, PR background. And, it's hard because, people want to have heroes, and, that's how our society is set up, where have, they call it influencers now, where there's different, kind of heroes that people follow and model themselves after. And, and that's why I don't, really get out and talk to a lot of people, is because I feel like all I do is just blow up all the cover stories. But, I hope it's helpful, but, it's hard for me because I just don't, I'm just exhausted by them. And, again, where we are now, I mean, we're literally under a national health emergency. We have, Article 5 of NATO triggered. There's a lot of risk, I feel like, that's out there, that's real. And, with my own family, doing the, taking the jab, like, I, again, don't know, it's hard for me because you get people that are just like, oh, like, they're so confident that they know, where there's not enough information to be confident. So to
Yeah.
hear either side, wherever you are, like, to not
It's
acknowledge that there's not enough information to make a definitive statement, where you at least leave some leeway for, hey, like, there's a lot going on that we can't really quantify or understand. So, the fact that that's not, being given to people, it makes me very uncomfortable and nervous. And, I'm, again, like, I'm, follow you and Mark and George, and I feel like, the information is so important, and trying to put it all together. But it is, it doesn't feel like it gets any traction. And, you get a lot of it's very easy to, to destroy things. It doesn't take a great, it's easy to ruin things. And that bothers me. I don't know, like, I just, it again, like, I feel like they just want people confused and afraid. And,
yeah.
if they do collapse the economic system, I mean, the whole, slogan is, order out of chaos, right? Isn't that the Albert Pike
And
slogan?
it wouldn't be their fault, it just, these things do happen, and it's unfortunate, but, that's just part of history. These things do happen. It's not going to be their fault, but because they are wise and prudent, they have planned, and this is the answer to I think what you, you were struggling with. Um, what How is it that they could just change the rules so that you no longer use traditional, solid, conservative valuation techniques, and you basically are out there, flying, without any real guidance? And but you're told these narratives, and this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen, and this is, we're building this, and you need to invest in this, or invest in Bitcoin, or invest in Boeing, or whatever. But without the actual valuation techniques, huge piles of money are following that advice, that seemingly unbelievable advice. And I think that the reason is because they already know what's going to happen, and so they realize, that everybody in the club has already decided to bet on this Keynesian bubble, or whatever you want to call it, and they've all committed to it, and they know that at some point it's going to bust, but they don't. But that's not stopping them. So that's why they don't need to worry about actual value of things, because they're going to upset the whole marketplace, as you said. That's a scary thought, but what else could explain the sudden decision to leave all reasonable valuation? It happened in my life too. I mean, I was thinking, I should get things that are going to last, that are going to that if I buy something, I want it to be, like even a television. When I bought a television, I wanted one that was last 5 years or 10 years or something. And now it's the opposite. It's like, you get an iPad, but you don't think you're going to keep that iPad for more than a couple of years, because there's going to be a new iPad that's going to come along. It's a whole new model, and we fall into it. I say, yeah, I want that new iPad, and I want it. I want that iPhone 13. Um, Gosh, man. I was going to say something about Julian Assange before we sign off tonight. This is the time of his trial. This is the most important trial yet for him, and I think he's a hero. I think he's a person uh, that they genuinely have put on ice, with the hope that he will just expire at some point and they won't have to deal with him anymore. Somebody on Twitter challenged me to do a song on Asian, so I have a song here. I wonder if you'd like to hear it.
Let's go for it. I mean, I honestly, I have not followed the Julian Assange story very closely. I know people really, George has talked about his background, where he saw him, like, when, as a young man in Australia.
Yeah, interesting.
And I'm also very intrigued by the fact that his lawyer was George Clooney's wife. Uh, what's her name?
Amal.
Amil
Amal.
Amal, who was a Sullivan and Cromwell lawyer, and then with Rebecca Mercer being involved with Assange, and then with the Roger Stone having Randy Credico being like the supposed person that dropped the thumb drive to him. But again, like, it's hard for me to analyze it, because he I mean, is incarcerated, and he could be completely unaware of, like, most of that stuff even happening. So it's just, obviously, I have not read a lot of WikiLeaks, but I feel like he should be allowed to share his message. So again, like, I don't feel like I'm an expert on what his situation, but it's I'm
I just want to wish him well
yeah.
tonight, and I acknowledge the fact that he has been in solitary confinement for a couple of years now, and this is a freedom of the press issue for me, and whatever the details of this particular case, he has become an icon. He has become the the real test for whether we're going to continue to have freedom of press, freedom of speech, or not. So anyway, uh, well, thanks for being with us tonight, David, and thanks for staying over a little late. Gosh, 9:37. So, and I still got more thoughts I wanted to pass back to you, but we'll save that for the next time.
Okay. Well, if you want to, book it for 2 hours, I feel like I can,
I'm the one that I'm worried about me. I'm just thinking I don't know if I can last
Oh,
another hour or not. But we had a good time tonight. I
yeah,
certainly
I
did.
love. Yeah, I love being on. And again, it's love all your readings and your guests, and I'm just happy to be in the group with everybody.
Well, thank you so much. David is the king of common sense. I think that's a good
My
thought. I agree
my
with that.
was the king of common sense. He was
Who?
my grandpa Key.
Oh, your grandpa Key.
I had
Okay.
one grandpa that lived in town that I never did anything with. He was the angriest person. He's the one that had the collapsed lung and had to live, in the iron lung or whatever. Um, and his wife died, pretty young. But my other grandpa was so smart and just he was a farm person. He had the farm, he had the garden in his backyard, and he had his workshop, which is just a disaster of wires and meters and all this stuff. But he was a great. I just feel very fortunate to have had a great relationship with him.
Well, it sounds like you had a great family, and I think there's some hero stories in your family that you may not have dug up yet. So just keep on digging. I think
Yeah,
you've told us about a lot of sadness and a lot of tragedy, and certainly that's true. And it sounds like you've had more than your fair share of sadness and tragedy. But I think that it's the odds are that you'll find some real positive stories too if you just keep on digging because gosh, we're all human, and one big thing in our life might dominate the memories of people that don't dig harder to find the real gems that might be right below the surface, just like everybody that's doing like Mark Kulak does when he does his research. He finds connections that are just right there, but nobody looked before.
yeah,
uh, it can be done. And yep. So thank you so much. Thanks for bringing your family history along with your incredible ability to explain corporate connections and the way that the economy works. You may not feel that you're able to give good advice. I understand that. Don't do it then. Don't give advice,
yeah.
but do give truth.
Hmm.
Spread the truth. When you see something that's true, that's important, like what you're doing on Twitter, you're doing it, man. Don't feel like you have to tell people the answers because
Yeah.
but
Try to.
everybody's going to find it or not find it on their own. There's no gurus here. That's one of the problems. People are always wanting to have a guru. Who can I follow? Or, do you think this guy's? Should I follow him? Or, what do you think about that guy? Or that woman? Or what's her name's blog? Do you think she's good? No, it's not about people. It's about the content of what you're seeing. And so, uh, that's what we're trying to do is put good content together. And you're part of it. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. And I'm gonna book you for 90 minutes. How's that?
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. If you want to hear my song, it's on my YouTube page, McDuff Lives 2. And I hope you'll give it a listen. I enjoyed putting it together today. Good night, everybody.